Welcome back, everybody. I'm Jerry, and today I'm going to go over my Week 3 power rankings, ranking all 32 teams in the order that I think they are good, as many other people do on the internet. And this one was one of the biggest mover weeks I've ever had, ever. So stay tuned for that. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And let's get into a couple teams that probably aren't going to do much moving this year, starting with the 32nd Carolina Panthers. Obviously, a little bit of upside here with the Red Rifle coming in, Andy Dalton. I don't think he's a bad quarterback, and I think if the Panthers were going to win a game this year, it seems like it was going to have to be with a different quarterback than Bryce Young because he has not looked good. Andy Dalton is coming in, so we'll see what happens. But I think I don't know. It's going to be an interesting. I don't know. Panthers stink. That's kind of the moral of it. If you watch my review video, I just put a big banner across the screen when I reviewed that game. It says the Panthers suck because that's what it seems like happens with the Panthers. They suck, and until further notice. That was a little Chicagoan coming out. Further notice. 31 Giants, another team that just kind of looks like they stink. Obviously, Malik Neighbors and Daniel Jones have a connection now that's kind of coming to, and they play a competent game against the Commanders, but in the hilarious fashion. They lose because Graham Gano is now, I think he's out for the season with a leg injury, so they can't kick extra points, and they lose because they had to go for two and couldn't get it, which I think is just comical for the Giants. That's just is expected at this point. Again, another team doesn't seem like they're going to move much unless Devin Singletary really takes off, or maybe maybe Daniel Jones and Neighbors have this great connection. They don't really have anybody on defense though, so I don't know. It's going to be a tough one again for the Giants too. I don't know how ceiling, this year seems to be like 28 probably for these back two teams. I don't see how they get any higher, but they could surprise me. Dable's over there. We'll see what happens. Moving on to 30, the Denver Broncos, one of the last teams that didn't move for a while, but the Broncos just kind of fall into one of those dysfunctional teams that hasn't really been able to put it together on offense. Bo Nix is making a lot of mistakes, and it just seems like they have a long way to go. If you watched last week's power rankings, the bottom teams, a lot of the teams that were on the bottom had some sort of dysfunction on some side of the ball, and the Broncos, to me, haven't really been able to put it together. And then their defense has been pretty good, but not for me, just not good enough, especially against the teams they've gone against. They lose to the Steelers, and it was really just because they couldn't put any offense together. Their defense really didn't do bad. I also don't think the Steelers' offense is very good. So you can see their points per game and yards per game at 10 and 9 is good. That's mainly because you played the Steelers last week, who have been able to win because of their defense, but their offense still hasn't really looked great, and it's going to need some work. So just because of how dysfunctional the offense is, and the defense is just seeming to be, to me, kind of average. I know I put the stats on the screen just to kind of give you a rough idea of where they rank in the league in those particular categories, and they rank high. I just think they haven't really played against any great talent yet, so that's where that number's coming from. And I've got them at 30th at 0-2. Next, we have the Tennessee Titans, who have lost back-to-back weeks with the same score, 17-24. And honestly, their offense really, it's not like they have a dysfunctional offense. It's mainly just Will Levis making careless mistakes, and it's mistakes that you can't make. I think the Tennessee Titans really could be higher. I think this is kind of a bit of a disgrace to have them, this low, because both of the games they lost could have won. The Bears showed that they have one of the better defenses in the league that week. And then the Jets, the Jets showed that they can actually be a pretty good football team. If you watched my review video too, I kind of talked about how the Jets still don't really look like a contender. But when you lose to two teams that are as bad as they are, you just kind of end up lower in my power rankings. I do think the Titans are a team that will have an opportunity to move up pretty high. And you'll actually see it if you watch last week's video, a lot of the teams that I said, hey, this team could shoot up, this team could shoot down, a lot of that kind of happened. And that's why we had so many big movers this week. This one, not huge, but only moving back 3, the Tennessee Titans at 0-2 to 29. Then we have a very big mover here, the Los Angeles Rams. I think this is the farthest I've ever moved a team. And I've said before that I don't like moving a team because of injuries. But what are you supposed to do with the with the Rams? I mean, you have the whole offensive line is pretty battered, mainly your tackles, which is the most important part. And then the two people next to me here, Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua, both injured. So it's basically going to be the Matt Stafford and Kyron Williams show. And I don't think Kyron Williams has really looked, up to snuff with how he was playing last year. So, I mean, you see their rankings: points per game, 27th on offense, 31st on defense. And they're able to get yards, but that was also mainly to Cooper Kupp. So now with him injured, I don't really know. It doesn't look like he's going to be back immediately. I don't think he's playing this week. So until further notice, until they get some kind of groove back together, I just kind of threw him down here because it was a massive loss to a team that I didn't think was great in the Cardinals. Obviously, they've proved to be, pretty decent. But the Rams are going to have to show me something, to move up higher. And I think this is a little disrespectful. This is another one where I'm probably overreacting. They probably shouldn't be this low. But with how bad they got smacked and everything that's gone down with the injuries for them, I don't know how they're going to be moving forward. So they're going to be far back. But I think the Rams are still a team that, you could get up to the mid to low teens. So that's where they were last week at 13. That's where I had them. And again, I've gone back and forth about this, but with all the injuries they had, they just didn't look like they could really do anything. So, and that was the other thing is like, even if that's how this team normally wins games, is because the offense plays well and scores a lot of points. The defense really hasn't been the best, as you can see, 31 and 32 in, defensive points per game and yards per game. So obviously it's kind of inflated from the Cardinals last week, but I think with their defense not being the same without Aaron Donald, and their offense being very injured, like half the offense is injured, it's going to be tough. So 28 for the Rams. Again, I think it's a little too low, but it's just where I have them for now. I couldn't really make a change in my mind. I got the Patriots ahead of them still. And the Patriots are as low as they are, moving back 3 spots, mainly because their offense is basically running the ball and throwing it to Hunter Henry so far. Obviously, that wasn't week 1. Hunter Henry wasn't involved as much, but last week that was pretty much the entirety of the game. And I don't think, and in both weeks, they were just running the shit out of the ball. So I think 27 really low for a 1-1 team. Obviously, the lowest that I have here, and they kind of surprised me last week beating the Bengals. But you lose to the Seahawks, and I don't think that their way that that they won and the way that they're playing is going to be sustainable, because eventually somebody's going to figure out how to stop the run, and they're just going to. I think the Patriots are going to have a tough time. So I got the Patriots back here at 27 again, lowest 1-1 team. So I think they could move up a little bit. I can't really see the Patriots getting much higher than like 20-ish though so far for my ceiling. Could be wrong, and they can prove me wrong. I've been proved wrong many times before, and you can see 5th in points per game on defense, 11th in yards per game. So their defense is doing pretty well, especially against a team like the Bengals and the Seahawks, where you got a lot of talent. But I just don't think that offense is going to be able to sustain that. They're going to have to start passing the ball. Could be wrong, but 27 for the Patriots. Next, we have the Chicago Bears, who, another really low team. We talked about earlier, the having teams that just have a dysfunctional side of the ball. Well, that's the Bears here. Their offense is really they don't have anything going for them at the moment. They probably have one of the worst run games in the league, and Caleb Williams is starting to get some passing going, but you're having some costly drops. Already 2 touchdown drops this season, one by Rome Odunze, which was a tough ball to catch. It's probably where it's got to be. And if you're drafted 9th overall and you're expected to be an elite, well, not elite out the gate, but a good, at least even a good rookie target, got to catch that. And then Keenan Allen had a drop in the end zone. So everybody likes to talk about how Caleb Williams hasn't thrown a touchdown pass yet. Well, he has thrown 2 if you hang on to it, which has been a problem for him. DJ Moore looking visibly frustrated on the sideline. And again, the offensive line hasn't really been able to do much of anything. And I don't think that the game plan's been great, basically resulting in, I don't know if Shane Waldron's been getting worried about the pressure, so he's just running a bunch of screens. But that's basically, it's very lateral. screen pass game, which is not, to me, where Caleb Williams succeeds. Bears, until they get their offense going, I think if they get their offense going, we're looking at a high teens team. I think the only, like, the highest is going to be like sneak into the wild card for the playoffs. That's kind of my ceiling for them. And I think that could happen still. They're 1-1, so anything can happen. They could be 9-8, 10-7, and sneak into that wild card, and then theoretically they'd be ranked as like a 13th, 14th team. So I think that's possible, but that's definitely their ceiling. I don't see it going much higher, and really that's just going to be the offense working it out. But for now, they're going to be at 26th. Again, too kind of dysfunctional. And again, it was against the Texans too, so that's something to be hopeful for, Bears fans. Is like, if you're losing by 6 to probably one of the better teams in the league right now, I would say that's something to be positive about. So Bears are at 26, moving back 5 spots. The Commanders, I move up 3 spots. Yeah, they beat the Giants, so I didn't want to read too much into that, but their offense actually looked like they could put it together, and oddly enough, I'm trusting Dan Quinn to do something with that defense and to have them improve there, who hasn't looked good so far. A lot of new names and a lot of new faces, not to Dan Quinn, but to the Commanders, bringing over a lot of people from the Cowboys. You still have Daron Payne and Jonathan Allen on the interior. And I like a lot of the names that they brought over there. This is a team where, with how well the offense, not well, the offense, I don't know. The offense is probably doing the best of the rookie quarterbacks, which isn't saying much because Caleb Williams and the Bears have been non-existent. Bo Nix has pretty much been non-existent as well, except it includes more mistakes. And then as far as, Drake May and Penix, they're not playing. So I would say so far Jaden Daniels is doing the best and looking the best in the NFL. And I think the offense, Brian Robinson had like 130 yards or something last week. So the offense is doing something there, and just more functional than the teams that we've talked about. So I'm putting them up to 25 at 1-1. I think it's a fair spot again against the Giants. So how much can you really tell? But I think from what we've seen, I think it's a fair assessment. Next, we have the Jacksonville Jaguars. Second biggest mover of the week. I didn't know what to do here. I just didn't think that they should have lost like that to the Browns. And Trevor Lawrence looked bad, 14 for 30. I don't know. I don't know what to think of the Jaguars. And I think I probably moved them too far. Actually, I think they only moved 13. I think my number's wrong there. I'm pretty sure they were 11 last week. I might have had them at 10, though. Yeah, you know what? I did have them at 10. The number's not wrong. So I don't know. The Jacksonville Jaguars looked just unable to do anything last week. And you have, last week they lost to the Dolphins. They're 0-2. So I think this is, fairly high for an 0-2 team. They're the 8th worst. And obviously we had a couple 1-1 teams in there. So you have 2 losses. One's to the Dolphins, who I think are a pretty good team, but now you have, Tua injured, and they don't really look like they can do much of anything with Tua injured. We'll see what Tyler Huntley can do over there. But yeah, the Jaguars, just with how bad Trevor Lawrence has looked so far, it just seems like he's been on a steady decline, kind of like a Ezekiel Elliott version of a quarterback, honestly, because, well, I guess that wouldn't be the case, because Trevor Lawrence's first year with Urban Meyer was absolutely horrible and awful, just altogether. Kind of declined from there. But we'll see what happens with the Jaguars. I just had to move them back far because they did not deserve to be in the top 10 like I thought. I thought they were, hey, this is a good team. They need to work out the kinks. No, they didn't really look good last week. They're going to have to do something to show me that they're good to move up any farther. But for now, they're going to be at 24. Next, we have another big mover, the Indianapolis Colts. This is probably one of the first ones where I told you that, hey, everybody's talking about, oh, look at the beautiful pass by Anthony Richardson, and look at, the Colts, this and that. And it was a close game against the Texans. Well, it almost wasn't a close game against the Texans. If you go back to that week 1, Anthony Richardson had 2 deep balls that he completed, and they ended up scoring touchdowns. You can't just take the points away. You can't do that. I understand that. They made the plays and that happened. But if you take those away, he would have had under 100 passing yards, and it would have been, 13 to 29. So I think with them not having those big pass plays and Anthony Richardson making a couple mistakes, you have Malik Willis in the Green Bay Packers come in and take him down. And when you lose to a backup quarterback who hasn't in history been able to do anything in the NFL, you have a big problem there. They weren't able to stop the run at all, which I think is really scary for the Colts because you're going to need to be able to do that. And you'd think that they'd be a little better just having to practice against Jonathan Taylor and Anthony Richardson. But I guess maybe they don't practice the run, or maybe that doesn't have an effect and they just aren't great at stopping it, or maybe the Packers had a good game plan. But yeah, the Colts looked really bad, and at 0-2, I think they deserve to be back here. It's tough to put an 0-2 team for me in the top half at this point. You're going to see there is a couple because they're just teams that don't typically lose that have gotten a couple losses. But yeah, the Colts, they need a lot of work, and so they're back here at 23, moving back 12 spots, another big mover this week. Next, we have the Cleveland Browns, who just move up one spot again. They beat the Jaguars, but it was kind of in an ugly fashion. Their defense looked a little better. Actually, I would say a lot better, just if you're going to assume that Trevor Lawrence, Travis Etienne, Brian Thomas Jr., Christian Kirk, all those guys aren't doing as well. The Jaguars are going to get Evan Ingram back, so I don't know how much that's going to affect anything. But yeah, Browns have a bad loss to the Cowboys week 1. Then they barely beat the Jaguars, who just looked kind of awful. So they still have to be down here. I put them ahead of the Jaguars because they beat them. Seems to make sense to me. Don't always do that. It's really if the teams are I think they're close in talent all around, and one has just won over the other. I think it's fair to put them in front. You'll see that's not always the case. But yeah, I think the Browns are just okay. I still don't think Deshaun Watson's very good. The team, to me, looked better with Joe Flacco last year, so they don't have him anymore. He's on the Colts. Maybe the Colts think about, I don't know, you can't bench Anthony Richardson. I shouldn't have even started to say that sentence, but Anthony Richardson's going to take some time. We're not talking about the Colts. We're talking about the Browns, and I think they deserve to move up a spot because they get a win. They're 1-1. I still think their defense and Myles Garrett is going to be good, and as long as the offense can start kind of putting it together, hopefully they get Nick Chubb back sooner rather than later, but can't really factor any of that in yet. So the Browns for me are at 22, moving up just the one spot, but they are moving up. Atlanta Falcons move up 6 spots. I had them ranked really low because of their pretty bad loss, week 1 to the Steelers, who the Steelers didn't really look great to me, and the Falcons lose. Then the Falcons come in and they beat the Eagles. So big win for the Redbirds here. I guess they'd be Blackbirds, as opposed to the Eagles. But yeah, big win for them. But I can't overreact too much to it personally. I think it would be. This is another team. I think it'd be fairly easy to move up, and I think this is a team, maybe looking kind of a similar ceiling to the Bears for me, as they might sneak into a wild card and do a 9-8, 10-7 sort of dance. And but we'll have to see. We'll have to see how they progress throughout the year. See if Kirk Chains can put more drives together, kind of like he did on on the Eagles last week. Monday. But yeah, I think Falcons definitely deserve to move up. I think they can continue to move up, but they're going to have to keep playing well. They can't lose to a team like the Steelers like they did. And, they're going to have to beat some pretty good teams, to move up into that lower teen area for me. So for now, Falcons move up. Big jump, though. 6 spots up to 21. Cincinnati Bengals move up 5 spots for me. I know they lost 2 games, but first game was really bad. You lose to the Patriots. So I had them really low, and I probably had them too low. Obviously, they lose again in a game to the Chiefs, who I have usually as one of the top teams, and they lose by 1 point in a game that they probably should have won. So I thought it was fair to me to put them up 5 spots to 20. And I know, again, 0-2, how can you say that? I think if you lose to the Chiefs by 20, you're able to shut down. I didn't expect the Bengals defense to be doing well. You got 15 points per game on offense, 10 points yards per game on both on defense there. But I think again, that's kind of inflated because they played the Patriots, but they also were able to shut down the Chiefs offense pretty well. So that's something to keep in mind. I thought they were worthy of moving up even in a loss. If they would have beat the Chiefs, would it have been wrong to move them up? 7, 8 spots? I don't think so. So because the box score and the final score at the end of the game says that they lost, only move up the 5 spots. But again, I thought they probably should have won that game. It was against the Chiefs. So I move them up 5 spots to 20, where I think is fair for them right now. We'll see where they can go from here. Another big mover in the Las Vegas Raiders, who honestly, shocked the world here, beating the Ravens. And it wasn't really that they played better than the Ravens. It was just kind of like the timing. Like when they say it's chess, not checkers, the Raiders really put it on when they needed to, and that's when they were able to get the win. Now, granted, they had a bad loss in week 1, so that's why they're still lower on the list. But 19th, honestly, I thought the Raiders were going to be decent this year. I'm a big Gardner Minshew fan, and obviously he proved that he can put it together. I think the biggest problem for me right now, and the reason they're going to stay a little bit lower for now, is they haven't been able to figure out that run game at all. And I'm honestly kind of impressed with how well Gardner Minshew is doing for the team not really having very much of a run game. It kind of ends up being get the ball to Devontae Adams and Brock Bowers, and it worked. But I think they're going to need to put that run game together. I think the defense is looking better with adding Christian Wilkins and having Max Crosby, the Condor, next to me here, that he's just a monster. So I think the Raiders are good. I think they can move up still. It is going to require their running game to be a little bit better for me. So they stay at 19, moving up 10 spots. So big move. Next, we have the Jets, who move up 2 spots. They beat the Titans. Again, didn't really think Titans were a great team. And the Jets haven't looked good yet. They don't look like a contender. They look like a team that could make the playoffs, especially with however long Tua ends up being out, and if Tyler Huntley can't help out there, in the division with who they're playing, and the other teams they're facing. I don't think they have a chance to win the division. I think Bills probably take that one down, but I think the Jets they looked better, but they're gonna have to keep getting better. Aaron Rodgers only threw for like 170 passing yards. Breece Hall kind of took over there, and the defense looked okay, but honestly, the Jets defense for me has been pretty underwhelming for a Robert Saleh defense. So they just need to look better to get into that kind of like playoff tier team for me so far, and I think they can do it. But for right now, they're going to move up only the 2 spots to 18. Next, we have the Dallas Cowboys, who move way back. One of the biggest losers here. Obviously in a pretty bad loss, honestly, to the Saints, who the Saints taking everybody by surprise this year, I think. But with how bad they lost, they didn't really have any like super major injuries that would have made it look that bad. They really just didn't look great. Their defense is supposed to be one of their like shining points, and they didn't look great. The offense, I don't think the run game personally has looked very good so far. They need some help there, and it's still just basically been CD on offense, CD and Dak. So the Cowboys, who are a team that normally, and like they were 4 last week because they murdered the Browns, and I thought the Browns were going to be like a mid-tier team, which they've turned out to be a lower team. And then, and then to lose as bad as you do to the Saints, you have, 2 of the biggest blowout games were the Cowboys and the Saints. So you think, okay, it'll be a high scoring game. They'll be in it back and forth, and the Saints ran away with it, which I just was not expecting. So the Cowboys end up being one of the biggest losers this week, moving back to 17. I don't think this takes them out of, the playoff competition. Honestly, I think they could move up a little bit higher. There's just so many teams that have kind of looked more complete and gotten better wins, in my opinion, against either better teams or closer games against worse teams. So I felt Cowboys had to be kind of at the mid-tier. I think you could make an argument for like probably like up to 12 at this point. And if somebody else has the Cowboys at like 12 on their power rankings, I'd be like, okay, that's fine. But it was just a bad loss to me. And you can't have bad losses like that when the only team so far you've beat is the Browns. So they move way back to 17, 1-1, and move back 13 spots. Again, one of the biggest movers this week. Pittsburgh Steelers just move up a spot. Again, 2-0, lowest 2-0 team on my list. It's just their offense really hasn't looked good, and their defense has looked great. It's kind of like this is kind of like honestly, the Bears. If you think about it, the defense for the Bears and the Steelers looked amazing. The offense really doesn't look great for the Steelers. Honestly, the only difference has really been Justin Fields hasn't turned the ball over, and Caleb Williams did a couple times. And if you told me the Bears beat the Texans and ended up being 2-0, they would probably be as high as the Steelers right now. And the Steelers, if they lost, probably would be a bit lower. So just getting two not very impressive wins that don't really involve any offense. They're going to need, you can't always win games like that, and you're going to play against good teams that are going to put up points. Who did they beat? The Broncos here. So, yeah, I mean, they won 13-6. So it's just not very impressive to me. And then they beat the Falcons too, but, and the Falcons beat the Eagles, but I still don't think the Falcons are a great team that are putting it together back. So I think the Steelers kind of bailed out, and we get our first 2-0 team on the list here at the 16th ranked Pittsburgh Steelers. Next, we have the Miami Dolphins, another big mover, moving back 10 spots. Had them in the top 5 week 1, getting a win over the Jaguars, who, again, I thought were going to be a little bit better. Then week 2, they just get absolutely murdered by the Bills. And the Bills look like a good football team again. And honestly, that was kind of before, like, they had the big lead before Tua came out. So you can't even say, oh, well, Tua came out and that's why they got beat so bad. They really, it kind of started happening before that. So with Tua being out, Tyler Huntley coming in, we really don't know what's going to happen there. So I moved him back to 10 spots because I think with Tyler Huntley for a minimum of 4 weeks, I don't know how many games they're going to win. Now, maybe he'll come in. I've always liked Tyler Huntley, and I think he was always the perfect backup for the Ravens. I was honestly very surprised to hear that he was on their practice squad, because I thought he was always perfect for a backup for the Ravens. So the fact that they let that happen is that's a different story. But yeah, the Dolphins, as far as your starting quarterback being out and how the team looked with that, it wasn't great. So they moved back 10 spots, a big move. For me, again, defense hasn't really looked great either. So if you can't get the ball to Tyreek, injuries in the running back room too, now that I'm thinking about it, if you can't get the ball to Tyreek and Waddle enough, your big playmakers, and A-Chain, of course, too, you're gonna struggle. And so they're back at 15 for me. And the Cardinals, big mover upper to 14th here, moving up 8 spots, and a massive win over the Rams. Again, you play a close game against the Bills, who I think are a great football team. And then you have a massive win over the Rams, who, again, were very injured. And I think it's kind of unfair to maybe give them too much credit for beating the Rams in the situation that they were in. But honestly, they've looked pretty good, like all around as a team. Their offense is just clicking. Kyler Murray with a perfect passer rating last week and able to put up those points on the Bills too. I think their defense, to be like a contender, Super Bowl run or something, is going to need to be a little bit higher. But for me, they look like a team that could make the playoffs, which is a big surprise to me because I didn't think the Cardinals were going to be great this year. Obviously, Marvin Harrison has his breakout game. So great game for the Cardinals this week. And if they can keep this up, I think they'll probably keep moving up. They might be able to hang around the 10 or lower, teen numbers, 13, 14. But if they start losing and start doing some Cardinals things, is going to bring them back down. So this is the one probably I'm most unsure of right now, but how it looks with their win against the Bills, or their loss, close loss against the Bills, and their big win over the Rams, it looks like they can be a good football team, between Kyler, Marv, and James Conner has actually looked really good too. So Arizona Cardinals end up at 14 for me, moving up 8 spots, right behind the Seattle Seahawks, who have 2 wins. Patriots over the Patriots and the Broncos, who I don't think are great wins, but they have 2 wins, and they've looked pretty good all around as a team. They've just played against some worse teams, so I think the Seahawks probably have at this point an easier opportunity to move down. They missed Kenneth Walker, so when he comes back, that's going to change things for me, I think. But that's what kind of why I still have them. They're 2-0. They haven't really looked like they're a liability on offense or defense. They're a fairly well-rounded team. They just haven't beat any good teams for me to move them up any closer to the top 10. I think if anything, the Seahawks it's going to be easier for them to move down this year, moving forward. But I think so far with how they've played. I think they're deserving of being at 13. And again, I think they could move up and down. Again, I think they could move. I think they could move up or down. I think more closer to down, if anything, though. So Seahawks at 13. Again, not super happy with that number. Not super confident in it, but yeah, that's where the Seattle Seahawks end up at 13. Then next we have the Philadelphia Eagles at 12. You know, bad loss, honestly. It wasn't a bad loss. It was 1 point, but it was bad of them to lose, and it looks bad to them for me, for the Falcons, who seemed like they still needed to do a lot to put it together. Eagles get really soft on defense at the end, and it results in a Falcons win. And I just don't think, if you're going to be like a contender, it's tough losing to a team like that this early in the season and losing the way you did. You can't lose those games if you're going to be a contender at a Super Bowl. So I still think they're in that conversation. But to move up and get back into that top 10, they're going to have to beat a good team by a significant amount. You know, you beat the Packers, who I think are a good football team. And so that's why they're still pretty high up here at 12. But when you lose to the Falcons like that, I feel like it's completely fair moving back 4 spots. I still think they're a great football team. This puts them in the playoff conversation. Not even a wild card. Like I think the Eagles are still going to be the Eagles, but with how bad that game kind of ended, and that's just a big flaw. Whether that was Sirianni or whoever was in charge of how that defense was playing at the end, that just let the Falcons drive right down the field. It just didn't look good for me. So they moved back 4 spots to 12. Baltimore Ravens, the highest 0-2 team. I mentioned earlier that it's going to be tough to be high up at 0-2. I think kind of some fluke losses. You lose to the Chiefs, who I think are a great football team, and then you lose to the Raiders in a game where I think the Ravens played better. They just lost. And again, honestly, looking at this, I think I probably should have put the Eagles ahead of the Baltimore Ravens, because the Eagles were at least able to win a game so far. But yeah, so that's wrong on me. I think Eagles probably should be at 11 here. Baltimore Ravens should be at 12. It's just tough for me to move back on the Ravens, because their team seems like it would be so good. With their defense, they always play pretty good, and their defense has been kind of underwhelming this year so far, especially with how they let Gardner Minshew go down and beat him. So, and then their offense with Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson, I think, is going to be one of the biggest weapons or pairings in the league. And for whatever reason, they're just not able to get their score higher than the opposing team at the end of the game so far. So that's why I still have them so high. If they lose a third time in a row, I can't actually think of who they play right now. But if they lose a third, they're just going to keep moving down. But it's just very difficult for me even with how they've played. Obviously, they haven't been able to finish. But with how they've played, it's tough for me to just move them, to the bottom half of the league at this point, being 0-2. So they move back 8 spots to 11. And boy, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. They just have to win. That's all they have to do, is they have to put it all together, and they have to have a higher score than the other team at the end of the game. So the Ravens, for me, are at 11. They move back 8 spots. Big move. Again, they probably should be at 12. Eagles should be at 11. I'll concede that, just thinking about it and talking through it right now. But first, organizing the teams, that's what I thought. So Detroit Lions are next. You can't lose to the Buccaneers to me like that. I don't want to be a big believer in the Buccaneers, but they've just looked so good so far. Their defense has played well. Their offense has been incredible. And just really a big surprise to me, where Baker Mayfield's just been able to do it with whoever. It's like, okay, you're going to guard Mike Evans, then Chris Godwin will have a day. And Rachaad White, unfortunately, gets injured. And I think he's been a big part of the offense. And for him to go down and then for the Lions to still not be able to win, I think it says a lot about the Buccaneers. So Lions still have them as a top 10 team. I'm not out on the Lions. I think they're a great football team, and I think they're going to go far. We also have the Lions fans threatening Dan Campbell to the point where when they found out where he lived and he now has to move out of his house, which Lions fans they can't have anything nice. They have Dan Campbell, who I think, in my opinion, is probably one of the best coaches in the league, just purely as being a dude. Like, obviously people are going to talk about Mike Tomlin and Andy Reid, and yes, those guys are like top of the top all time, but Dan Campbell is a great coach in this league. And then you've got Lions fans basically forcing him out of his own house because he's worried about threats, which is just crazy to me after a loss to a team and the Buccaneers have looked good. So yeah, not great look for Lions fans. But yeah, they only moved back 4 spots. But again, it was to the Buccaneers. And there's a lot of teams that I wasn't expecting to put in the top 10 that are in the top 10. And the Lions are able to hang on and stay in there in a 4-point loss to the Buccaneers. But they're 1-1. So they're at 10th, moving back 4 spots, right behind the Green Bay Packers, who I moved them up because I said, if you watch my review, I said they look scary. Because the Packers, I did not expect them to well, actually I did technically based on my predictions. I bet I would be a betting man against them or for them to win against the Colts. But I don't know. It was just, I forgot that Jordan Love was out and Malik Willis was playing when I made that video, and the Packers still end up going on to win it and kind of make the Colts look like idiots. They basically just were able to force a bunch of turnovers and kind of abuse whatever game Anthony Richardson's been trying to play. And then everybody knew they were going to run the ball, and they just were able to. So Packers end up at 9. I know it's ahead of the Lions, but I think that their win against the Colts was impressive for the situation. And I think their loss against the Eagles was close enough to where they also could have won that game. And they're at 1-1 now. And I don't know, it is scary to me. We'll have to see what happens moving forward. The Packers have all the NFC North has a fairly easy schedule this year. So we'll see what happens. But I think Packers at 9 for me. I know it was a close win over the Colts, who I said were really bad, but you had a close loss against the Eagles, and you had Malik Willis in for this game. So I have them at 9, moving up 3 spots into that top 10. The Los Angeles Chargers, another one of the biggest movers. I said there's a bunch of teams that I didn't expect in the top 10, and the Chargers have looked really good. Again, this game was against the Panthers, so I could be overreacting, but I think the scary part is how good J.K. Dobbins has been, and you always think of the Chargers, oh, it's Justin Herbert, it's going to be a passing team, and they get Jim Harbaugh in there, and now all of a sudden you've got a running team with a quarterback who can pass, mind you. So it's kind of funny to see that all along the Chargers might have been a pretty good football team if they paid more attention to the run, and then all while their defense has been playing top-notch, again, against kind of lower-tier teams. And what did they play week 1? The Raiders, and then the Panthers here. So they didn't play the greatest teams, but being able to run on the teams as they have been, and not even really needing to use the pass as much as they have in the past. I think having that threat of still having Justin Herbert able to sling that thing around there, and you've got, Ladd McConkey, I think can be a good receiver in the league. So I got the Chargers at 2-0 until further notice, and number 8 until further notice. Just, I think so far it's tough for me to put them in the top 10, especially with them playing lower tier teams. But they're 2-0, and they've really beat bad teams by a lot, which I think shows that they're deserving of the top 10 and that number 8 position. Next, we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who we just talked about, who I think have been overly impressive with how well they've played so far. They're 2-0. They've showed that it's not just Mike Evans with Godwin as a side piece. You can have Godwin be the guy, and then Mike Evans, have to take a back seat, I guess. Rachaad White, again, injured. It looks like he could play, and I don't know how long he's going to be out. And even Bucky Irving, not horrible when he filled in. So great things so far for the Buccaneers. And again, they looked like a good team, and they're up higher than the Chargers because they just beat the Lions. So again, I think the Lions are a great team. So again, that to me, that makes me think the Buccaneers should be up here, because you showed in week 1 that you can stomp a bad team, and then you showed in week 2 that you can beat a good team. Those are all so far. We're 2 weeks in. We can't overreact to any of this stuff, but 2 weeks in, that shows me that you're probably going to be a good football team this year until you show me otherwise. So the Buccaneers move up 7 spots to 7 at 2-0, right behind the Minnesota Vikings, who, again, they beat the 49ers and they kind of stomped on the 49ers. Honestly, it wasn't like a big margin of a win, but it was, Brock Purdy. You have Brock Purdy, who's like, that scheme is crazy. And I think the Minnesota Vikings kind of shocking the world here with MVP candidate Sam Darnold, which is just unbelievable to me. You got the guy next to me here is out, though. How long, we don't know. I think they said he might have even saw the practice field, so I don't know if he was just doing walkthroughs or something. But yeah, Vikings, this is another team where you've stomped a bad team in the Giants, and then you've also beat in a pretty, I wouldn't say badly, but better than I would have thought the Vikings could beat the 49ers, who, again, I think are one of the best teams in the league. And I think, because we're talking about the 49ers, let's talk about them. I do have them still ahead. And you go, Jerry, you said earlier that typically you'll put a team ahead of another team if they beat them. All of this, I think, with the power rankings, I try to factor out. I'm kind of trying to predict where they're going to be at the end of the season, early on in the season. I also will, like, if a team hasn't showed that they're good at all, they're going to move back really far. If they showed that they're really good, again, a big component for me is if you can crush a shitty team and if you can beat a good team, that is going to put you pretty high up, especially only 2 games in, not much information to go off of. So in this case, the 49ers have lost to a pretty, which I don't even know what the Vikings are going to be. You wouldn't expect them to be great, but so far they've been great. But I think their team's just a little bit more well-rounded. So I have the 49ers at 5, and then, still moving back 3 spots, but they're 1-1. They lose to the Vikings, so I have them moving back. And then we'll move on to the New Orleans Saints. Boy, the New Orleans Saints, they're a team that I could put at number 1. Honestly, if you look at everything that they've done so far, I've been talking about it. You beat a bad team or you crush a bad team rather, and then honestly, you crush who we thought was going to be a good team. They have the highest point differential so far, which is a little early, but they're definitely one of the top teams in the league. They move up 11 spots for me. They're going to have to keep doing this to stay up here. Wasn't expecting to put the Saints this high, but with how they've played so far, I think it's only fair. And yeah, so I got the Saints at 4, moving up 11 spots. Again, they're going to have to keep playing this well for them to move up here. Offenses looked good. The defenses look good. Saints are the Saints. Again, you could make an argument for 1 at this point. And then you've got the Houston Texans, who honestly, there was a point where I had the Houston Texans at 1. I was thinking about putting them at 1. And I went, no. They barely beat the Colts, who I think are not a good team. And then they barely beat the Bears, who are barely a good team. The reason the Texans are as high as they are is because of how well-rounded I think they are. I think it just seems like no matter what, their defense is going to play a pretty good game, and their offense is going to produce somewhere, usually through Nico Collins. Obviously, Joe Mixon comes out, and it severely hurts their run game. It was playing against Chicago, who has a great defense. And at the end, Chicago wasn't able to win the game, and the Texans come out with a W. I think the Texans are another team that maybe could be too high, but again, as far as being a well-rounded, able to do it on offense, able to do it on defense, going to be tough moving forward, I think the Texans are up there. And it's mainly just seeing, the only other thing that I can really say is seeing them from last year and the improvements that they made. They just seem to me like they're still better than the Saints and the Vikings and some of these like teams that Chargers that we didn't expect to be up here. So I have them up very high at 3. Again, I don't, could the Texans be the number 1 team in the league? I think maybe they're going to have to really beat a good team by a wide margin to be into that kind of realm, which you could argue that these next two teams haven't done that. And the next one being the Kansas City Chiefs, who move out of my number one spot. And at this point, you found out who my number one spot is because there's only one team left. But so far, the Chiefs, you win by 1 point against the Bengals, who, again, I don't think have looked good early in the year, which is normally how they are. And then you lose to the Ravens, who I think are a good team, but they're 0-2. So it's one of those things where you kind of have to, it was tough for me to judge, but I think because they should have lost the game, I just don't think they can be the number one team. There's a clear team to me that they did get a win over a team who I thought wasn't going to be very bad I didn't think was going to be very good week one. Turns out they are pretty good. And then they beat a team who's been good, who obviously have an injury, but we'll just pull it up here. The Buffalo Bills. I put them 8 spots up to number one because I'm looking at it. I go, okay, well, the Chiefs barely beat two teams that, Bengals are supposed to be good, haven't been very good. And then the other team that the Chiefs beat is the Ravens, who again are supposed to be good, but it was too close of a game for me. The Buffalo Bills absolutely murder the Dolphins, and they beat the Cardinals only by 1 score. But Kyler Murray had a perfect passer rating last week, and the Cardinals looked like they actually could be a good team. So factoring all that out, it led me to believe that the Bills should be number one here. They move up 8 spots. Again, some of the biggest movers this week, but all these top teams that are 2-0, a lot of teams that we wouldn't expect, but it is teams that have, again, crushed shitty teams and beat good teams. In this case, the Bills have crushed a normally pretty good team. So Bills are at number one. Let's go over the whole list here. Again, things that I think should move. I think the Eagles definitely should be ahead of the Ravens. That's a mistake on my part. Probably could have changed it, but I'm leaving it alone. I think, you look at the bottom, that seems pretty fair. Like, I think that whole bottom row I'm pretty happy with. I think the Patriots, you could potentially put them ahead of the Bears because they at least have something that they're doing well on offense and their defenses look good. I think the Bears defense is just that good. I also think you'd probably put the Bears a little bit higher because I think their defense could be that much better than the Cardinals, maybe the Jaguars, maybe the Colts. I probably don't think you bring them ahead of the Browns. And, kind of same thing with the Patriots. I think the Rams are probably too low just because I'm factoring in their injuries too much. And I normally don't do that, but there's just so many of the injuries that it just kind of seems inevitable at this point. So let me know what you think down below. Do you think that this is an accurate power rankings? What would be the first change that you would make? The top 10, you got Bills, Chiefs, Texans, Saints, 49ers, Vikings, Bucks, Chargers, Packers, Lions. Who should be in there? Should the Eagles be in there? I personally don't think so. Right now, I think they definitely will. Same thing with the Ravens. They're not in there now. I think they could. I would say the same thing. Honestly, it seems like the Cardinals could be with how well they're playing so far early this year. You could say the same thing about the Dolphins once they get healthy. I think the Cowboys could end up back in the top 10. There's a lot of teams, but I think actually after probably the Jets, I don't think, like, the Jets are probably the last team that could somehow make it into the top 10. Like, if they're really looking good later in the year, I think they could end up there. But it's going to be tough for any of those other teams too. So let me know what you think down below. Thank you for watching and have a great day.